In your own words, what are the benefits to a positive work culture?
Positive work culture. Well, I think the easiest way to think about this is for people to just remember back on a past work culture, work situation that was really negative and what made it so bad. Because when I do my programs and trainings, I'll ask that question, and a lot of times it comes down to other people, right? Your boss, your coworkers, and how much that drains our motivation, hurts our productivity, and in the end, from a business perspective, it increases turnover. Right, you have higher quality defects. There's amazing amount of research that really shows how positivity can boost and help the bottom line from a whole variety of aspects, from innovation to motivation to collaboration.
Oh, that's awesome. So what do you think some leaders or some ways leaders to identify and engage this positivity in their work, in their organizations, their culture? So I guess, how do they judge whether they have a positive culture or a negative culture going on right now?
Well, a lot of times the easiest thing to do is ask your people. And I would really recommend asking those people that are the go-getters, the people that care about their job. I mean, hopefully that's most of the people in your organization, but really listen to those people and ask them how they feel about the culture. Ask them to describe it. Don't ask them if it's positive or negative, but say, how would you describe our culture?
That's good. That's like a yes or no question, right? Is it positive or negative? You're not really fleshing out the real. So then beyond that, so oftentimes leaders create a stigma, and they have a title, and some people are intimidated by that title. How do they know if they're getting the truth?
Thank you. That is so huge, because I remember even in my corporate days, I felt very comfortable going to the head of our site and sharing my thoughts, and other people were like, there's no way I would say how I really feel. So sometimes it's really looking for the advocates and having them go out and get the information. If you think there might be an issue with that title or some intimidation part, reach out to the people that people will talk to and have them ask around.
That's really good. That's really good, because we need those truth tellers.
Yes.
And sometimes that can be hard. I think the other thing that I've experienced, and whether I've been guilty of it or not, I've certainly experienced it when people do tell you the truth, listen and don't take offense. Instead of because how you get those truth tellers pushed away from you is by actually, that's not true. No, that can't be true. This is going right. This is going right. Look, a business is soaring. And you push them away by just demeaning their thoughts to you, or them giving their feedback to you. You basically shut them down, right?
So true. And it's a natural reaction. I mean, it's a threat response that we have. So you really have to be aware of it, be prepared for it, and in a way, psych yourself up to say, okay, I'm biting my tongue right now, right? I want to say, no, that didn't happen that way, or that's not accurate. Versus, like you say, listen, maybe ask for clarification. Don't judge, don't analyze in that moment. Just be as open as you can be to receive.
Yeah. Ask the question, shut up.
Yes.
Yes. That would be great advice. And that's hard to do, especially as a leader, because you're a natural problem solver, right? So that's good. The age-old adage of God gave us one mouth and two ears for a reason. That's the number one way to get truth tellers away from you, though, is if you shut them down. So what are some popular problems or themes you see from organizations? And then how do you respond or tell them to respond?
Probably the most common challenge I see that organizations will reach out to me is because they're going through some kind of change. Let's be honest, right? Almost every organization is going through change, and change can hurt morale. People can be struggling with it, resisting it. And when I come in to help organizations, I don't do change management. What I do is kind of like attitude management, because what happens, and just again, understanding how our brains work, understanding how we think, it's the uncertainty. Just like that defensiveness kicks in when someone maybe says something that we disagree with, like we were talking earlier, to just listen. When we have uncertainty, it triggers that same threat response in our brain as if someone was trying to hurt us. So the more we can create clarity and just understanding around change, the less challenge there will be. And really just educating people. When I come in and do programs, it's helping people understand, hey, this is natural. This is a normal response. be aware of it, and then here's some tools to help you pause, notice, choose, right? Pause, notice how you're feeling, that tightness, that resistance, that defensiveness, depending on your personality, and then how can you choose differently, overcome it, not stay in that defense, threat response.
That's great. That's great. So before we get to your path of positivity, I want to ask you about the science a little bit. So the brain science, that fascinates me. You being a scientist, obviously it fascinates you. I am not, though. So, but it does fascinate me how the brain works. Talk about the overriding negativity our brain, how that is hardwired for us, so we can possibly recognize it.
Thanks for asking that, because honestly, when I first learned about positive psychology, I'd never heard of this science, had no idea what it was about, but just that biggest takeaway for me was realizing that we are wired to be negative, to dwell on, to think about, to ruminate on all the problems, the things that feel unfair. And when I learned that this is part of our survival instinct, and actually it's a good thing, because if we weren't really tuned into, the dangers and the threats out there, we wouldn't be here today as a species. So thank you, brain, right? Thank you for that survival response. But how can we find a better balance? Because what will happen is we can easily get stuck there, and then it's not helpful, right? So it's very, very beneficial when you can pause, notice, oh, look, here I'm replaying that past argument, that drama, whatever it might be, and recognize that you have the power, the ability to shift your thinking and choose a different thought, which then, of course, our thoughts drive our emotions, which drive our actions and behaviors, which ultimately drive our success. So when we train ourselves to get better at just being aware, hey, this negative thought is natural, tune in, and then say, okay, it's not helpful now, because sometimes a negative thought is helpful. It helps you plan, prepare, whatever it is. That's why our survival instinct is there. But to just be able to recognize that and choose if you should be shifting your thoughts.
Yeah, I think the recognition piece, like you said, notice is absolutely huge. So with that, the brain's automatically wired to be negative. How does media, social media, all that stuff play into it? Because it's such a big part of our daily lives.
Yes.
How does it play into our already hardwired brain to be negative? And then how do we overcome it? Or what advice do you have for people on that?
I think it's so interesting, right? I had no idea of this negative bias that we have, but the media knows. The news knows.
They've known for decades.
Oh, yeah. And they've played it up, right? They know what we'll pay attention to. And so that's what they feed us. They'll feed us reams and reams of negative news, negative shows, because that's what attracts our attention. That's where our survival brain is like, oh, you better watch this, And again, awareness is the biggest thing, just to realize that's what they're doing. They're really manipulating your survival instinct, taking advantage of that. And
taking advantage of you.
Yes,
us.
Yes. And it's a business, right? And so they know what will drive their business, drive their ratings, drive the views. And so they're taking advantage of that. And you're letting them do that because you don't know any better. I didn't know any better. But now I understand a little bit more of what's happening. I'm like, I don't want to waste my life, my energy, my time on stuff that I can't have an impact on, that I can't do anything about. Granted, awareness is important. You need to know what's going on in the world, but be selective, right? Be selective on what you put your energy and time into and what's helpful for you to know versus, this is just sucking up my energy and my life, and I can't do anything about it.
So I don't know if you've heard this, but I heard this a while back I had a neuroscientist as a business coach, and he talked about that in the amygdala, the piece of your brain, part of your brain that magnifies that negativity. Yep. He told me that there was a line in news media that, and I guess it's still applicable today, because I've talked to some anchors about this, that if it bleeds, it leads. Mm-hmm. Like that. So first, sick thing to think about, but this is, so you said that it's a business, and their job is to get eyeballs to the screen for their advertisers. So we've got to why do they do this? It's for their advertisers. It's a business.
Right.
So they know what's going to draw us in. So literally, if it's not locally, if there's not something locally that's that dramatic, they shift to nationally. And then later in the news stuff, they'll get to weather, to sports, to something positive, like a squirrel water skiing or whatever it may be. But it's going to start with negative because that's what draws you in. So, but what about social media? Because that's such a big thing now. So let's say, okay, I don't watch the news, Tina. I've turned that off.
Okay.
But I have this Facebook feed full of negative political stuff. Oh, and my friends are also chiming in about this negative stuff.
And so everybody has to find their own balance, right? What's the right balance around social media for me or for you might be totally different from someone else. Honestly, I'm very careful with my social media. I don't spend a lot of time on it. And I'm careful with the type of people I connect with. I try to connect with like-minded people who really do want to, stay focused and control their thoughts, control where they put their energy in their life. So it was so funny. Okay, this is probably maybe a bad thing to say, but my parents were complaining and saying, oh, there's so many political advertisements. I'm so glad the election's done with. And I said, I honestly have seen almost no advertisements because of just the connections and the media that I do connect with. So it's amazing. We think we don't have a choice in this, but we really have much more power than we think we do.
It's totally a choice. And you could you can follow certain things on Facebook. You could choose not to.
Right.
You can follow certain friends on Facebook. You could choose not to.
Right.
That's the power of it that you have. It's interesting you mentioned those negative commercials. So some people sometimes ask, okay, well, why don't we hear the positive message or what they actually want to do once they get elected to power? There's a reason these negative commercials are aired. It's because they work.
Exactly.
It's like otherwise they wouldn't, if they didn't work, they wouldn't be wasting gobs and gobs of money putting them on TV.
Right. And again, it's kind of scary to think about that they're tapping into our kind of in a way, our subconscious attraction to that kind of negativity. Consciously we'll be like, oh, that's terrible, but subconsciously there we are, we're attracted to it.
It's unfortunate. All right, we're going to stay off that.
Okay,
we'll get off that. I wanted to walk you through you walk us through the path for positivity. So can you give us a broad overview of the program and why you created it?
Yes. So when I started really getting into positive psychology, I went back and became certified, did a lot of research on it, looking at who are the thought leaders on this, trying to really understand it. There's so much great information out there. And again, I thought, how do I help people access this? How do I make it easy for people to figure this out, to apply it? So I wanted to come up with a model, something that would kind of walk people through steps that could make it easier for them to take back control, to shift their thinking. And the more I used this, the more I taught it and shared it, the more I read about it. It's funny, this path for positivity just evolved almost on its own. I just found that this was a sequence that I kept going back to, and I then sort of officially made it, gave it a name and really use it a lot in my programs and in my training.
No, that's awesome. So step one is understand. Why did you choose to start there?
So I like this analogy. Maybe it's silly, but if someone were to just tell you, you should brush your teeth twice a day, and they didn't tell you that's because it'll help prevent cavities, that's the why behind it. Yeah. Would you do it? It's kind of like somebody's telling you to, I don't know, like your mom says, would you jump off a building if somebody just told you to? No, you want to know the why before
your mom
you commit
said that too? My mom definitely said that.
Yes. So I feel like if we understand the why it's hard, why things are kind of the way they are, it's easier to buy in and to commit to the other steps and strategies.
That's great. I couldn't agree any more with that.
Yeah.
The why behind things it's so powerful. Coincidentally, you gave that example of brushing her teeth. My 7-year-old just got her first cavity, and now. So this is fascinating. They have, the Sonic Care toothbrushes for adults, they have for kids. There's also an app that I think it's Sonic created, because there's an app for everything, right?
Right.
Where it actually reverses the camera, so it takes a picture of your mouth, and then it actually shows her these like green little germs on her teeth, and as she's brushing, and it'll go for 2 minutes. It'll show her the spots in her mouth where to go through Bluetooth on the toothbrush to the phone.
Wow.
To show her where she needs a brush, in the backs of her teeth, the fronts of her teeth, molars, front. So she just started this a week ago, and absolutely fascinating. I'm like, that's great. I probably could have saved myself some cavities growing up.
Me too.
With that help. But now she gets it, just like you said there. We've been preaching, Mom and Dad, we've been preaching twice a day. We do it in the morning, we do it going to bed, and sometimes gets listened to, sometimes not. But now she's like, hey, Mom, where's the phone? I need the app to brush my teeth.
Yep.
If that gets you to brush your teeth, great.
Yep. And probably that cavities are never fun. I can't imagine today they're really still
not
much
much
fun.
better.
So
Yeah.
to kind of have that little bit of pain is a great motivator.
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes we need the pain to
Yes.
move. All right. So step 2, realize. Can you walk us through the difficulties, but also the importance of realizing we need or can change?
I think it was Henry Ford who said, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. Because if you think you can't change, if that's your mindset, you can't, right? You're stuck. It's a limiting belief. So what I think is huge is now there's science more and more in the last 10, 15 years coming out saying our brains are plastic. There's this term neuroplasticity. It's been getting in the news. This realization that at any age our brains are constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
And really 10, 20 years ago they would have said, oh, once you're an adult, you're done changing.
By a certain age,
Yeah.
it's done.
But there's new technology like functional MRI where now they can see the changes happening. And what's fascinating is, so this term neuroplasticity, this has really become a area of great study around even things like recovering from stroke, brain trauma, but also related to positivity, happiness, gratitude, because they're finding that it's not just the experiences we have that influence how our brains change, but also what we focus on and what we think about. You can imagine, if you start getting a negative attitude about something and you have this natural, just negative thought pattern you fall into, that is changing your brain. It's reinforcing, it's creating a habit of thinking that way. So when we can intentionally pay attention, choose our thoughts and realize, you know what, I am going to purposely spend time focusing on these positive thoughts, you are physically changing your brain, creating new neural connections, reinforcing them, helping to make it easier.
I love a phrase you said in there ever so subtly, intentionally pay attention. That's huge.
Yes.
Like, how often are we, paying attention, being where our feet are versus being distracted by the myriad of distractions that we have nowadays, but intentionally paying attention. Like, there's intention behind everything, and it's particularly change.
Yes, and it's so funny because today, of course, now more than ever, we're so busy and so distracted that it can be harder for people to be intentional and pay attention. So it takes even more purposeful, planning to make that possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes some reflective thinking, which John Maxwell credits with being the way to learn, is the reflective thinking.
So true. Yeah, if we're just busy doing all the time, you kind of get stuck in a cycle, right? How much are you learning and growing if you're just busy doing? And yet society today tends to reward us or propose that is what we should be doing, is just busy getting things done, cross them off your list. This idea of reflecting, thinking, being intentional, there's not an action necessarily associated with that, right? So it seems wasteful to many people, but it's not.
It's interesting, as you were saying that, a recurring comment made by my father growing up was repetition is the mother of learning.
Yep.
Okay, so, but if we reflectively thought on the experience we just had, would we need the repetition?
Ooh, interesting. Yeah, I wonder.
So may have to put some more research into that.
Yep.
All right, but so step 3 is notice our thoughts, and we kind of led into this one pretty well. This is a tough one. Sometimes we get so caught up in that fast-paced work life or the distractions we just talked about. I think a lot of people just go on autopilot. And so walk us through step 3.
When I tell people the power of our thoughts, when I do some of my exercises, one of the quotes I love is, we think we experience the world, but we experience our thoughts and think that's the world. So when we can start noticing and paying attention, just I'll even tell people just set a timer on your device to go off a few times a day, and then have that be a trigger. Oh, what have I just been thinking about for the last few minutes? Because when we can pause and notice our thoughts, that is truly the first step in taking back our power, taking back our control, right? Otherwise, if you're just busy and you're on autopilot and you're letting basically kind of your survival instincts, which, as we were just talking about, tend to lead us down a very negative thought pattern, that's running your life and you're letting it. And I had no idea until I really started diving into this positive psychology area that we had that control, that we had that choice. I love to tell people now that positivity is a choice. I make that choice easier. This framework is all about how can we recognize that choice, make that choice easier. Pausing, noticing, tuning in. I mean, we hear words like mindfulness, we hear words like emotional intelligence. That's all related to becoming self-aware, right? What are our thoughts, and are they serving us?
Yeah, well, that's great. Are your thoughts serving you?
Yes.
I was reading the other day that it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% of our thoughts are the same as they were yesterday.
That sounds right. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So then if you don't like your life today, maybe you need to change your thoughts, right? That's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. It's a great place to start. We were sitting at dinner, my wife and I, the other night. We actually got a date night for her birthday. So we had a sitter, and she took the time. The sitter had texted, and so she was just checking to see, because we got 4 little kids.
Oh, wow.
But I happened to notice, I was looking around the restaurant, you think about, like, everyone's in their own little bubble. Yep. But yet we're all coexisting together. But everyone at each different table at the restaurant is having their own conversation. Or you even look at them, and then I looked at one couple, and they were both on their phones.
Oh, jeez.
I was like, so my wife and I are pretty good about putting the phone down, and because we get so rare opportunity of actually being alone together without the 4 kids, that we're pretty good at it. This time she was texting the babysitter, so I'm just glancing around the room, just observing. And one observation was that everyone's in their own bubble, and that's just fascinating. You know, we're all together in this ecosystem, but just in our own bubble. And the other was looking at a couple that was both on their phones, looking down, not talking to each other. I'm like, do you not like each other? Is this was that a day? And then I asked my wife, I was like, what do you think? Sometimes we just like make up stories about the couples that we may see, but they're both on their own phones. Like, is that a first date? Or are you guys well into this thing and you just don't like each other? You're just going through the motions on autopilot, or what it is. But I think taking those conscious steps and having those thoughts and checking those thoughts that you have, especially if they're ones you don't like on a day-to-day basis. I had that thought yesterday. Now I'm having it again today. Should probably put some reflective think time into that to make a change.
And a story I love to share, because life will always give us opportunities to practice this. There will always be things that pop up that we end up ruminating on, focusing on. We had an issue with a contractor who was remodeling our basement. Turns out the day they came out to start it was also the day we brought our daughter home from the hospital after she was born. They were a little hungover, so they made a few mistakes. And they're like, oh, don't worry, we'll just cover it all up. Well, ended up being a pretty big issue. So every time I see the name of that contractor on a billboard or on a truck, I have opportunity to notice my thoughts. See if I'm going to go down that downward spiral, right, of getting upset all over again. Or am I going to choose to let it go and realize, hey, that's not a good use of my time and energy? There's a saying, I love it, that says, as humans, if we cut ourselves, we hurt ourselves once. But if we experience some kind of drama or, stress like that, we will replay it so that we hurt ourselves hundreds, if not even more times with that one incident.
That's really powerful. Because most people have also heard the phrase death by 1,000 cuts. You continue to replay those negative thoughts, especially the ones that you can't do anything about or don't serve any purpose in your life. You're essentially killing yourself.
Yeah, and think about how it's not only just affecting your experience of your day, but how you're influencing the people that interact with you, your family, your colleagues, your coworkers, and it's a ripple effect. It's contagious. So when you pay attention to it for your own benefit, it's also rippling and benefiting the people around you.
Yeah, the author John Gordon talks about those type of people being energy vampires.
Right.
And I've never heard a better analogy than that, or just maybe a phrase, if you will, whereas we all plug into each other energy-wise.
Yes.
And everyone's had that experience where they walked away and be like, oh, that was draining. And that's that energy vampire. We're like, okay, I don't need to spend time with that person anymore. But there might be some family members or some friends you've allowed in your life that you're on autopilot, and they are energy vampires, and every time you're spent, they take a little bit more from you, and you just haven't woke up and noticed it yet.
Yep, that's true. And so what I love is it goes the other way too. We can be the positive catalyst that sends out the positive ripple.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing the world, our communities, our families need now more than ever, to me, is having more people be that positive catalyst. It's so easy to commiserate, to vent to each other. And not that that can't be done in a little bit, but if that's how you live most of the time, it's not a very happy life.
No, I couldn't agree more. So step 4, let's talk about some tools to change.
I love this step. This is the fun part where in my programs we do some hands-on stuff. We do some experimenting with this. As a scientist, I love the word experiment. So I'll just share a couple of quick ones, but there's really so many different ways that we can practice different strategies that will make it easier, that sort of purposely help train our brains to get better at seeing the positive. A couple of my simple favorite ones that are so easy to do anywhere. Right here at UW-Madison is Professor Richie Davidson. He wrote a book called The Emotional Life of Your Brain. He has used functional MRI and other technologies to track and map the parts of our brain, and he knows the parts that are associated with feeling good and being happy. And if you do a fake smile with just your cheeks and your mouth, nothing happens. But if you also activate those muscles around the corners of your eyes, like in a natural smile, then they see the part of our brain associated with being happier light up. So this is a simple hack, right? You can do this in your car, on the phone, in a meeting. It's just a slight smile. Just make sure you're kind of crinkling the corners of your eyes. And in a moment, you should feel better. And I do this all the time now. I do this in the car, right? You're driving along, maybe you just have a straight face and your mind's kind of going wherever it will. If you have that slight smile, your mind is going to go in a whole different direction. It's amazing. It's so fun to play with. So that's one of my easy, quick hacks I love to share. Another one I love to share was a lifesaver for me when I was laid off and decided, I'm not going to get another biotech job. I am truly going to take this positive psychology and try to spread it. So I reinvented myself, became a speaker, started my own company. I would have waves of nausea, right? Those first few months. Like, what am I doing? I have no idea how to do this. 3 to 5 slow, deep breaths. Lowers our blood pressure, lowers our heart rate, lets the cortisol dissipate out of our system from that big stress response, and you feel better. And it's funny how there are times, even when I'm just in a rush driving somewhere, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be late. Okay, 3 to 5 slow, deep breaths. It's okay. You're going to get there when you get there, right? It's again, what I love is you can do either one of these anywhere. You don't need a membership. You don't need an app on your phone. It's very few side effects. It's great. So those are 2 simple ones I love to share right away.
7 seconds in, 11 seconds out.
Yep. If you want to get really, into the details, there's, optimized ways to do it. But even if you just do whatever you can, it still helps.
Yeah, but there's no wonder that there's, meditation, yoga focuses on breath.
Right.
And focus, even if you are ADD like me, I can, if you're going to start meditating, it's like meditating, praying, whatever it may be, focusing on breath first and doing a minute at a time. And then going to 2 minutes and then slowly working your way up. Because if you just sit there and go, I'm going to meditate for 30 minutes, to someone like me, not happening. It's a daunting, overwhelming thought. So you got to shorten that and make sure you can focus on it. But yeah, if you're stressed, that's an exercise we teach here to our advisors going into any meeting, because you got to be authentically you and have the client's best interest at heart. So if you're nervous for whatever reason, maybe it's you think they're more successful than anyone you've ever sat with, whatever it may be, focus on your breath and make sure you're coming across you. And then the best way to do that, I think, is to ground yourself.
And here's another quick one that I love, and that is find a playlist of songs, right? Maybe have different playlists, have those playlists that get you energized, get you motivated, fired up. Maybe have that playlist that calms you down when you are feeling stressed. have that playlist that helps you get heart-centered, grateful. I know, when I'm driving, heading towards a talk, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I really want to make sure that I'm connecting with the audience, that I'm giving them the information that resonates with them. So I want to be sure I'm coming from my heart. And so I'll have those songs that I either sing out loud or play on my device, right? And music is so powerful. There's a whole science behind music and how quickly it can help us shift, right, out of a bad mood and feelings of anxiety. So with today's devices, we can access that so easily.
Very quickly.
Yes.
In an instant, you have those playlists queued up. That's a great tool. So lastly, step 5, remember to choose.
So with our distractions, with our busyness, how can we remember we have this power, that we have this ability to choose our thoughts, remember these strategies? I like to throw out some different ideas for people to experiment with. One of the suggestions I have is, how about your password? Pretty much almost anybody is typing a password in at some point somewhere. Use it. Maybe it's the first letter of a phrase of a favorite song. Maybe it's a memory. Maybe it's a strategy you're focusing on. But then every time you type it in, you're saying that phrase or that song, and it's a reminder, a trigger. I tell people, use some kind of jewelry. I see you have a bracelet on. You can use a piece of jewelry, a coin, or a stone in your pocket that's with you, and every time you notice it or touch it, that should be a prompt to say, okay, what have I been thinking about? Has that been useful?
Yeah, I don't know my bracelet's more inspirational than anything because it's a kid fighting cancer. So when I do look at that, I do feel grateful.
Great. Yeah, wonderful.
So, no, that's cool. And interesting you say that. I had to look down and be like, oh, yeah, I am wearing a bracelet. Because it's a band, yeah.
Yeah, a band. Sounds like a more appropriate word.
No, that's all right. It was a great reminder. So how to deal with suffering morale? I guess any thoughts on that within an organization, uncertainty, stuff of that nature. So because of change and uncertainty, how do we deal with that? Because if we know one of the only certainties we have is change.
So true, so true. And so what I really am an advocate of is realizing that whether it's due to change or whatever issues in your culture, in your organization, you can think of it from two aspects. One is everybody's individual perspective that they're bringing. Their attitude, is the glass half full, half empty attitude, and the environment, the situation in which they work, right? Because when I ask people, think back on a positive work situation and what made it so good. Again, our coworkers, our bosses, but also there's research that shows, whether you look at Gallup, whether you look at in the academic research, I've organized it into sort of 5 main categories. And that is when you can consider your environment that your people work in and how much the environment is addressing these 5 issues. And I'll list them off here quick, see if I can remember all 5. One is mastery, your ability to use your talent, strengths, and to grow. One is autonomy, having control, feeling like your input matters, that you have some decision process in what you do. The purpose, understanding the purpose and meaning of why what you do matters, how it connects to the bigger picture, how it might matter for your values and how you impact the world. Sense of belonging, feeling connected with your coworkers, the company, and the last one I call the environment, which is the physical environment. Is it a dreary, depressing place to work? And also the psychological environment. Are your coworkers, are the people you're around, are they upbeat? So when you can address both people's perspective and attitude with, from that idea, I like to tell them, if you can bring in training, great. If not, create book clubs, have TED Talk, luncheons. Just put books and articles, posters out. Awareness is such a big key. I think of what if everybody knew they had the power to choose, that they could shift their thinking. Not everybody would want to do it, but more people would for sure. So the more awareness we can create, the more we can really build up our organizations, build up our communities and families.
Could you list those 5 things again? Those were awesome.
Sure. Oh, let's see. I was so proud I could do it.
Yeah.
So mastery, autonomy, belonging, purpose, and environment. So physical and psychological environment.
That's so good. And I think that anyone listening, if you're an employee, think about those. And do you feel those 5 things? If not, maybe you're not in your calling. If you're an employer and you're not providing those 5 things,
right,
that's where you have to look at your culture and really make a change. And particularly if you're looking at hiring millennials, because I would say I've observed that millennials want those 5 things more than they want the financial rewards that you might be providing them.
So true. Yeah. Yes. And there's a lot of science behind these areas showing these are what motivate us. These are what get us engaged and caring about our work and each other more. It's kind of like those minimal requirements for well-being, but this is in your work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the why behind it.
Right.
And it could be any one of those things or all of them.
Right.
For any given person. So how do you go from survival mode to success mode?
Wow, that's kind of a big question.
I know. I like big questions.
I think it's really kind of comes back to that awareness thing. If you are in a survival mode and you're like, oh, this is my life, I'm stuck, this is all I can do. And you keep doing the same things, you keep having the same thoughts, you keep having the same focus, it's not going to change. So whether it can be, finding some of these strategies, getting some books, challenging the way you think, challenge your limiting beliefs about what's possible. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was in my biotech days, I remember thinking, boy, the current company I was with was having a lot of layoffs. And I knew the area that we were focused on, we needed as a company to shift our focus to stay, up to speed on stuff. But I felt like, well, what else could I do? Because, this is what I've done for the last, almost 20 years. This is kind of, I couldn't go anywhere else and have the kind of job I have and be, successful this way. So the universe decided to give me a kick in the butt, got laid off, had discovered positive psychology, and it was so interesting. I just never looked back. It was scary. It was exciting. I'm so grateful for it. But I think so many of us do feel stuck or trapped. I mean, health insurance is a big thing, right? Mm-hmm. Finances are a big thing.
Yep.
When you have to make changes, you will find a way. May not be apparent in the moment, but if you feel a calling, if you have a purpose to do something different, you will find a way to make it happen.
So I'm really glad, because I told you I want to talk about that, because you transitioned after 20 years. So you're in your 40s. There may be some listeners that are doing that. But you said you got a kick in the pants from the universe. What if someone's listening that's in their 40s, 50s, and they're kind of fledgling, like they're just in the middle. They're in flux. They're not getting kicked to the curb by their current employer, but they are not happy. Mm-hmm. So they're not getting that. Maybe the pain isn't great enough like it was for you, whereas you were laid off. What advice would you give to them?
In my corporate world, I had no idea that there was almost like this whole other culture out there of people who were reinventing themselves, doing different careers, pursuing their dreams and passions. And as I basically was sort of thrown into this, getting out into networking groups, meeting people, having coffee with people who had done this, I heard so many amazing stories. And when you hear people who have done it under, even situations where their family didn't support them, where they didn't have the money, they had to, move in with a friend even in some severe cases, but they were determined to do it. It's so inspiring. Mm-hmm, and when you start connecting with those people, they want to help. There's a whole community of people out there who support each other, who help each other fulfill their dreams. And now being connected and surrounded by those people, it's amazing. And I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity.
The thing about too, as you were saying that, is some people don't know this, but
right.
Ray Kroc was at McDonald's, who founded McDonald's, was I think in his 50s or 60s. Walt Disney was in his 50s or 60s yes. before that all started. I mean, some of these most iconic American brands, Disney and McDonald's, these are entrepreneurs that didn't start till later in life. And I truly believe that we're all endowed with gifts. And I think that our responsibilities, quote unquote, like we talked about a little bit pre-show, like they just get in the way. Like whether I had a family earlier, and then I got a mortgage, and then all these things added up, and I got all these responsibilities. I can't take that leap. What if I fail?
What if I fail?
And that's the immediate question.
And that's where our brains naturally go to. Remember, that negative bias, that survival instinct will kick in and will tell you all the terrible things that are going to happen if you try to pursue your dreams. And that's when you have to say, thank you, brain. Thank you, survival instincts. But more is possible here, and I am going to take that step. And as you take that first step, the next step will appear. The path will start to lay out. You'll make mistakes. Things won't always be perfect. But it'll be an adventure. And what is better, right? What is that saying? Like, harbors are great for ships, but, that's not what a ship was built for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, do you want to live the safe life? And if so, if that really is what you're cut out for and that's what you want, great. But so many of us are living the safe life, and that's not what we want.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Now, on the opposite side of that, do it smartly.
True.
I mean, if in a simplest sense, do a Tchart of pros and cons. Make sure you don't not include your spouse on your ideas. So take some proactive steps that way. But at the end of the day, playing it safe usually doesn't lead to a life of fulfillment.
Yes, thank you for the caveat on that. Yes,
I don't want any lawsuits coming back at me.
Right,
hey,
there you go.
Josh and Tina said, I got to leave my job.
Have a plan, talk to people, right? There's so much information. I mean, with the internet now, you can learn almost anything on a YouTube video, right? Or, do your research.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit, finishing up on negativity. Let's say an example. I got a friend at work, coworker that's always negative. She or he can be such a drain. What's your advice to either separation or being respectful? You still got to be in this cohabitated space with them. Being respectful. How would you distance? How would you tell someone to distance respectfully?
I love that question. I get that is the number one question I get from people. Honestly, I get that all the time, and so I'm actually creating an online course, and my next book is actually going to be on that. Don't know the exact title yet, but basically, how do we build our immunity, right? Protect ourselves from the energy of the negativity around us with other people. And I've been interviewing experts all over the country on this. I've been doing research on this, and there's a variety of strategies we can take. But one big one that to me was so surprising, but I have seen it actually work. We so often want to change the other person, right? You're too negative, you have a bad attitude about this, you're this way, you're that way. When ultimately, if we are judging other people on something, that means we have more work to do on ourselves. So when we find ourselves unable to accept other people for where they're at in their journey, in their life, I mean, we don't often know the backstory. We often don't know what has led them, or what wiring or what past experiences has brought them to this moment, to this attitude. And when we can just give people space to be who they are and where they're at, and I mean, it takes some self-work, right, to do that, because it's, we like our own perspective of how things should be. And when other people don't fit into that expectation, they should change, right? They should change to fit what we think they should do.
It's them. It's
right?
not me,
it's not me, it's them. But other people's problems are their problems, not your problems, and really not your business, which to me was such a earth-shattering idea when I first learned about this. But if you can use this, if you can truly change your attitude when you're faced with an interaction with these people, when you have to interact, I'm all about setting boundaries. I'm all about, creating healthy spaces for ourselves and protecting ourselves. But, there are times when work, family situations, you really need to interact with these people. And that is, if you can approach them with an attitude of acceptance, it changes the energy between you, and that is truly when you will see the other person change more than when you just want them to change and wish that they would.
Yeah, I think Stephen Covey's habit here really applies of seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Yes.
And get to know some of that backstory and why they might be passive-aggressive, or why they might be so blunt, or maybe their mother or father is going through dementia right now and they're just overtired.
Right. Yeah. You don't know. And you think of life is hard. Everyone's going through struggles. And a lot of time, the big struggles we don't talk about. The big things that we, are stressing us out and causing us to not sleep and to be negative, we don't really tell other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why? So how did, like, I could think of someone just sitting here going, okay, Josh, Tina, you might be practiced in this. How would I go about getting to first seeking to understand, then to be understood? How do I, maybe they don't want to tell me about that. Mm-hmm. How do I approach that conversation?
Well, in some cases, it's just setting the boundary, right? And realizing that you do need to maybe distance yourself. But if it's come to a point where let's have a conversation about this, it's coming from being very heart-centered, from coming from a place of caring. Let's say you have an employee who's suddenly just not getting their work done or not showing up on time. There's some behavior issue. When you can come from a place of caring and not threatening, right? When you can say, hey, you're a good employee, really appreciate how you do this and this, but I've noticed this has become a problem. How can I help? What can I do? Is there something that we can talk about? And if you really can get heart-centered, the words will come to you. Mm-hmm. It can be hard if you're already upset about it, right? Then you need a little meditation time, a little reflection time, that song maybe to help you shift. But when you can get into that place, it will become easier to find the right words and the right approach.
Yeah, and remember, feelings are non-negotiable.
Yeah.
So you got to come from a spot of caring and understand how they're feeling. But maybe if you can tell them how you're feeling, that could open up as well.
Right. Yes.
So go from there. All right. Last question to help people out before we wrap up here. How do you save a bad day? I had a bad morning. How do I save the rest of my day?
Really, I think it kind of comes back to the fake smile, right? With your eyes, a song, some deep breaths, thinking of something you're grateful for. It's so easy when I'm driving in my car, maybe I've been rushed, maybe things are, the morning was tough, to just really pause and look around and just little simple things, right? It doesn't have to be anything big. I'm like, I'm just grateful I have a vehicle that's comfortable where I can turn up the heat in the cold weather, where I can have the opportunity to go and drive somewhere and do something that I want to do, to have this job, to, sometimes I'll just be thankful that I have my, favorite pair of socks that are clean. I mean, there's always something to be grateful for.
Do you have Christmas socks on right now, by the way?
Christmas socks? No, I don't think so.
Okay. I just didn't know if we were in the holiday spirit, if that was your favorite day.
That's a good idea.
Favorite pair of socks. I have Christmas socks, but they're not on yet. It's still Thanksgiving time.
True.
All right. So that's some great advice. The other advice I would give our listeners is start your day with it intentionally. Mm-hmm. Here's a lesson I learned, and I had to learn it the hard way. And it took probably months of me realizing why I was starting my day off kind of negatively. Checking my email first.
Ooh.
Yeah, don't do that. You have a 50-50 chance. You're either going to see a good email or a bad email. And the 50% chance that you see a bad email, it's going to set your day off really poorly. And then you may never recover from it.
True.
And then that bleeds into every other conversation you have. So what I do in the morning, and this, whether it's right or wrong, I pray. I have some time where I ask some questions on gratefulness, as you mentioned there, and I read. So I don't even check my phone. My phone is my alarm, like most people, but that's the only thing I use it for in the morning. And then I'm able to read, start my day proactively. I can get myself ready before I get the girls ready to go to school, and then I'm on my way. But I don't check my email until I get to the office.
And what I love, and you alluded it to, is that what works for one person might not work for the next person. It's finding what works for you. And really, in order to do that, you have to experiment. You have to try different things and see how they feel and see how you react. And, don't give up. There's so many different strategies and approaches. I think, so many people, like the Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, he's got a whole bunch of series of things. I was actually just going to
mention that, Mark, so we're glad you did.
Yeah, I mean, he's got great ideas of how to start your morning.
Yeah.
But even later, if you read some of his later stuff, he realizes that everybody needs to adapt it to fit their style, their personality, their day.
He's given you great ideas.
Yes.
And you have to apply that to your life, just like anything else. You can't, very little is just gospel. You have to take that in and figure out how that applies to your life.
Exactly.
And what gives you the most energy and positivity. All right. So I told you a little bit earlier, we're going to ask, because we ask all our listeners, either what book are you reading right now or your most favorite book that you've read recently?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, I have a ton of favorite books. I actually list them on my website that are related to positive psychology. If I had to pick just one, I really do like The How of Happiness by Sonia Lubomirsky, because it really has a ton of strategies, different just actionable steps people can take and experiment with and try.
Great.
So I think that's always a great one to start with.
Great. So how can our listeners get in touch with you if need be?
Sure. Please, first check out my website, thepositiveedge.net, N-E-T, or feel free to email me, Tina, T-I-N-A, at thepositiveedge.net. Always love to hear from people, comments, stories, your favorite books, your favorite quotes.
That's awesome. We will also have all this information on our website at inspirepeopleimpactlives.com. You can find show notes, book references that we mentioned today, and then Tina's contact information there as well. But thank you so much for being on the show today, Tina. I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I hope all of our listeners did as well.
Sounds good. Thanks, Josh.
You bet.